A poker game that reunited a father and son in death, two of the most important figures in American history whose lives and deaths were eerily intertwined, and two men whose deaths oddly bookended the First World War. These are terrifying coincidences in history that could be glitches in reality. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were two of the most important figures in American history. Despite their political differences, they grew closer later in life and actually became pretty good friends. What's really bizarre though is how both of them passed away on the same day. Now that's already quite a coincidence, but the day they passed away, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the very document they both helped draft. Adams, at the age of 90, had been in relatively good health, but collapsed in his reading chair that afternoon. His last words reportedly were, "Jefferson still lives." But no, Jefferson had actually died earlier that day around noon, after battling illness for some time. News of their deaths circulated quickly, and across the nation commemorations were held to honor them. The circumstances surrounding their deaths are eerie for sure, but there's some beauty to this story as well. The pair had been political adversaries in the past, but toward the end of their lives they became friends, and in the end they were tied together in a way no one could have ever predicted. Their deaths on the same day have come to kind of symbolize the shared ideals and values that defined the founding of the United States. In 1858, a bizarre coincidence occurred in San Francisco that involved a poker game, a man's death, and an unlikely twist of fate. Robert Fallon, a British man, was killed for cheating at a poker game at the Bella Union Saloon. Fallon's $600 winnings were left behind. See, the superstition at the time was that money won through cheating was unlucky. So the players decided to give the $600 pot to the first stranger who walked by, hoping he'd take Fallon's place at the table and they'd eventually win all the money back. They called a young man over who sat down and incredibly turned that $600 into $2,200. Police soon arrived to investigate the guy who'd just been killed and asked for that $600 back so they could pass it on to Fallon's next of kin. Well, it turned out that Fallon's next of kin was right there at the table already. He was the stranger that had been walking by the saloon and took his father's place, only he didn't know it. He hadn't seen his father in 7 years. It's hard to say whether this next woman had terrible luck or incredible luck. It's a kind of a perfect blend of both, really. Violet Jessop's life sounds like something out of a movie, but it's all true. This Irish-Argentine woman survived the sinking of both the Titanic and its sister ship, the Britannic. On April 14, 1912, Jessop was working as a stewardess on the Titanic when it struck an iceberg and began to sink. In the chaos, she was told to serve as an example to non-English speaking passengers, showing them how to board their lifeboats. She eventually made it off the ship, escaping in lifeboat 16. Speaking of the number 16, on November 21st, 1916, Jessop was serving as a nurse on the Britannic when it hit a mine and began sinking in the Aegean River. She grabbed a lifeboat and held on, eventually being rescued. Remarkably, she'd also suffered an injury to her head during the incident. Now, the fact that she'd survived both of these incidents is amazing, but what makes it all even stranger is that before all of this, she'd also sailed on the RMS Olympic, which collided with a British warship in 1911. So she survived all three of these accidents. It just seems like the universe did not want this woman sailing on boats. The first and the last deaths of World War I are a chilling coincidence. John Parr and George Ellison were the first and last British soldiers killed during the war. Parr was killed on August 21st, 1914, only 17 days after Britain declared war. Then on November 11th, 1918, just 90 minutes before the war ended, George Ellison, age 40, was killed. What's strange is that the two soldiers are buried right across from each other in St. Symphorian Military Cemetery, Belgium, separated by only 15 feet of grass. And no, this was not done on purpose. Their graves were placed there without any knowledge of their first and last statuses at the time. Out of every British soldier who died in the First World War, the first and last to die lay right across from each other. It's as if history itself placed them together, almost bookending the war. In the 1920s, American novelist Anne Parrish had an eerie experience while in Paris, also kind of sweet though. While browsing a bookstore, she came across an old book that she remembered fondly from her childhood, Jack Frost and Other Stories. She picked it up, showing it to her husband, telling him about how much she loved the book when she was young. Her husband went to open it, and he noticed there was an inscription on the inside. Ann Parish, 209 North Weber Street, Colorado Springs. Turned out this was Anne's very same childhood copy of the book. I don't know what got this guy pissed off, but his life story sounds pretty biblical, in a wrathful punishment sort of way. This poor sap named Walter Summerford was struck by lightning 4 times, 3 times while he was alive and once after his death, just as a final middle finger from above. It all started in 1918 when Summerford, then a major in the British Army during World War I, was struck by lightning on a battlefield in Belgium. Already wild being struck by lightning as is, especially while in battle though, as if life wasn't already hard enough for him. Anyway, that was just strike 1, and it left him paralyzed from the waist down. He persevered though, and after finally recovering and retiring to Vancouver, where he had a solid 6 years lightning free, he was struck a second time while fishing, leaving him paralyzed on the right side. Somehow he survived again though. Then in 1930, while taking a walk in the park, one of the most innocent, inoffensive things a person can do, he was struck by lightning a 3rd time, this time leaving him bedridden until his death 2 years later. But as I said, he wasn't even off the hook yet, as his gravestone was then struck by lightning, making it the 4th strike in his life, or afterlife. In Monza, Italy, King Umberto I and a local restaurant owner had a very strange encounter. The 2 men were nearly identical in appearance, first off, down to their face and build, and after discussing their striking resemblance, they discovered even more eerie similarities. Both were born on March 14th of 1844 in the same town. Both men had married women named Margherita. The restaurant owner even opened his restaurant on the same day that King Umberto was crowned King of Italy. Then on July 29th, 1900, King Umberto was informed that the restaurant owner had been killed that day in a mysterious accident. Well, just after the king received the news, an anarchist named Gaetano Bresci fired at the king 4 times, killing him instantly. The man had been seeking to avenge the people killed in Milan during the suppression of the riots in May of 1898. This next story is unbelievable and incredibly beautiful in a way. So in 1914, a German mother had her infant son's photo taken and left the film to be developed at a store in Strasbourg. When World War I broke out though, she couldn't go back for it of course, so she just assumed that she'd never get to see the photo. Well, fast forward 2 years and she bought a new film plate in Frankfurt to take a picture of her newborn daughter. She developed the photo and was upset at first. There was something wrong with the picture, but when she looked more closely, she noticed the photo was a double exposure. Her daughter's picture was overlaid with her son from 2 years before. Somehow her original undeveloped film had been mislabeled as unused and was sold back to her. So she finally got to develop her son's photo, just not in the way she'd been expecting. In 1838, Edgar Allan Poe wrote the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, where the crew of a stranded ship draws straws to decide who will be sacrificed for food. The unlucky soul is a cabin boy named Richard Parker, who ends up being killed and eaten by the others. In true Poe fashion, it's a grim tale, but unlike his more fantastical work, this one would actually play out in real life. In 1884, a ship sank, and the survivors were stranded at sea, starving. They drew straws to determine who would be sacrificed, and the person picked was the cabin boy, whose name was Richard Parker. Fictional account from nearly half a century earlier seemed to mirror a real-life event, almost like the story had somehow been predicting the future. Henry Ziegland was born in 1861 in Honeygrove, Texas. He was a farmer who got involved with a woman named Charla Harris, but in 1883 he ended the relationship. Charla was devastated. So devastated that she ended up taking her own life. Her brother was completely distraught. He blamed Henry for his sister's death and decided that he wanted some revenge. Well, one day he snuck into Henry's barn with a firearm and fired at him. The bullet only grazed Henry, but he smartly played dead. What Henry didn't know though was that the bullet had lodged itself into a tree by the barn. Well, 20 years later, Henry decided he was going to chop down that very tree. It was too thick for an axe, so he decided he'd need to blow it up. When the explosion went off, Henry died instantly. It wasn't from the blast. The bullet that had been lodged in the tree 2 decades earlier flew out at him. Absolutely nuts.
That's why there are parallel realities. You're not on their frequency, but they're here. have long been a cornerstone of the counterinsurgency doctrine. Casualties have long been a cornerstone of the counterinsurgency doctrine.
As he said, if you realize that there are an infinite number of parallel realities, it means there are an infinite number of parallel versions of Earth.
Well, don't ask me exactly how the replicator would work. If I knew, I'd patented it once.
On July 11th of 1991, a bunch of UFOs lit up the skies above Mexico City during a total solar eclipse. Thousands of people reported seeing a large metallic disc in the sky. Not only that, but footage of the object was captured and even broadcasted on the news. It was the first widely reported UFO sighting in Mexico City, which since that day has become a hotbed for UFO and unexplainable extraterrestrial activity. So what does this have to do with the Mayan calendar? Well, the calendar told of the July 11th eclipse, calling it the sixth sun of Quetzalcoatl, and claiming that it would bring about change and cosmic awareness, which I honestly think it's safe to say it did. Whether or not the calendar accurately predicting the events of July 11th is just some strange coincidence, or if the Mayans really did mean to calculate aliens' first major coming to Earth, for now remains a mystery. But I hope not for long, because personally, I am super eager to know more.
Alright, this next one is almost too incredible to be a mere coincidence. I'd love to see someone try and break this down and have it make any logical sense. This is the story of two twin brothers separated at birth who grew up and reunited as adults only to find that they'd basically led identical lives. They were born in 1940 and adopted into different families in Ohio. The twins had no contact with each other for nearly 4 decades, but when they finally reunited, the similarities in their lives were just too uncanny. Both were named James by their adoptive parents, which, alright, common but incredibly awesome name, and everyone named James is a winner, but, not all that crazy. There's more though. Growing up about 40 miles apart, they both went by the nickname Jim, and each brother would go on to marry a woman named Linda. After divorcing their first wives, both Jims found love again with women named Betty. Both also had sons who they each named James Allen. They also both had dogs. And what were their dogs' names? Well, one was named Toy and the other was named Toy. I'd get it if you named your dog Skipper or something like that, typical dog name, but Toy? That's odd. Both brothers also enjoyed woodworking and had a penchant for mechanical drawing. Even their choice of vacation spots matched up. Both Jims would often go to the same Florida beach. Their health habits were similar. Both had a history of headaches, smoked the same brand of cigarettes, and even gained and lost weight around the same periods in their lives. When Jim Lewis and Jim Springer finally met in 1979 at the age of 39, it was like they were looking at a slightly alternate reality version of themselves. The case of these twins is a pretty fascinating study on how much of our behavior and preferences might be hardwired into our DNA.
Next up, we have the strange life of Violet Jessop, who, during her time working as an ocean liner stewardess, was present for 3 separate ocean disasters, all on Olympic-class ocean liners, including one of the most famous disasters, the sinking of the RMS Titanic. On June 14th of 1991, Jessop was aboard the RMS Olympic when it crashed with the ocean cruiser HMA Hawk. The Olympic, which was at the time of the incident the largest civilian liner in the world, suffered heavy damage and flooded in the crash, but luckily it was able to make it back to Southampton and no one was killed or even seriously injured. On April 10th of 1912, Jessop was working as a stewardess on the RMS Titanic when it hit an iceberg and sank just 4 days into its maiden voyage. Luckily, she was able to board one of the ship's lifeboats and she made it safely to shore. 4 years later, on November 21st of 1916, Jessop was working aboard the HMHS Britannic when the ship hit a mine and sank in the Aegean Sea. It was the largest ship to be lost during the First World War. As the ship sank, Jessop attempted to jump to safety but instead hit her head on the ship's keel. She did, however, resurfaced, was rescued, and survived. This girl's got 9 lives, or at least 3.
Speaking of the Titanic though, let's talk about a little novella called Futility. After the sinking of the Titanic, folks were quick to point out the eerie similarities between the circumstances surrounding the real-life disaster and a fictional novella written by American author Morgan Robertson, which was written in 1898, 14 years before the sinking of the unsinkable ship. So what were the similarities? Well, the story describes a big British passenger liner called the Titan that is deemed unsinkable, but strikes an iceberg and sinks. Not only that, but the ship in the story doesn't have enough lifeboats and sinks in April in the North Atlantic Ocean. All the circumstances I listed there, other than the difference in the name of the ships, is identical to what happened in real life in 1912.
Got a sinking feeling about that one. Next up on our list today, we have the coincidental closeness of the rare Chelyabinsk meteor and the 2012 DA-14 asteroid, two incredibly rare events that occurred 16 hours apart on the exact same day, but seemingly had nothing to do with one another. On February 15th of 2013, an asteroid entered into Earth's atmosphere over the southern region of Russia and exploded, with a force equal to 20 to 30 of the atomic bombs used at Hiroshima. 1,500 people were wounded, and 7,000 buildings experienced varying degrees of damage as a result. After the explosion, the ground below was hot and the entire affected area smelled like smoke. As I said, something like this is extremely rare, and the event was also the only time in history that a meteor has been known to cause human injury. Not only that, but the meteor was not detected by authorities prior to it entering into the atmosphere. If that's not crazy enough, just 16 hours later, another asteroid named 2012 DA-14 came within 27,700 meters, 17,200 miles, of the surface of Earth, making it the closest asteroid of its size to have ever been recorded in modern times.
I'm going to call this next story the real-life Final Destination, because it sounds like a death you'd see in Final Destination. That's a movie you've seen, right?
No.
Anyway, this guy just could not escape the fate that was waiting for him. Henry Ziegland was born in 1861 in Honey Grove, Texas. He was a farmer who began dating a woman named Charla Karras. They lived together for a time, but in 1883, Henry dumped her. This left Charla utterly devastated, and in her despair, she ended up taking her own life. Charla's brother was filled with rage and blamed Henry for her death, and he decided he was going to take his revenge. So one day he snuck into Henry's barn while he was tending to the horses and fired at him. The bullet grazed Henry, who then pretended to be dead. Believing he had killed Henry, the brother then turned the firearm on himself. Little did Henry know, but the bullet had lodged into a tree by the barn. Now, 20 years went by, and Henry decided to cut down a tree in front of his barn. It was too thick to cut with an axe, so he opted for dynamite. When the dynamite went off, Henry was killed instantly. Not from the explosion, he was a fair distance away, but from the bullet that had been lodged into the tree 2 decades earlier.
Next up, we have the strange life of Robert Todd Lincoln, or should I say strange saving. As we all should know, the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth in a theater on April 14th of 1865. What you might not know is that during his presidency, Lincoln actually bore witness to 2 other assassinations of very prominent members of American society. The first was the assassination of Elmer Ellsworth, a Union Army colonel who was killed by a hotel owner in Virginia in May of 1868, and the second was a Union Army general named James B. McPherson, who was killed during the Battle of Atlanta in July of 1864. What's cool about this is that it's not actually the weird part. What's weird is that prior to the death of Abraham Lincoln at the hands of John Wilkes Booth, Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was actually saved by John Wilkes Booth's brother, Edwin Booth. Edwin, who was a famous actor at the time, had seen Robert Todd fall between the platform and a train at a train station and quickly pulled him to safety before things got gory. At the time, Edwin had no idea who Robert Todd was, and Robert Todd later recounted the incident, saying, "I was indebted to him for the rest of my life." Pretty strange stuff.
Speaking of Abraham Lincoln, he shares some pretty uncanny similarities with John F. Kennedy. People have listed tons of coincidences between the two, too many to list here, but Some of the most famous include Lincoln and Kennedy both being elected to Congress in a year ending in 46. Then both were elected president in a year ending in 60. They both had security agents named William, who died at the age of 75. The eeriest similarities surround their deaths, though. Both presidents died after being fired at in the head on a Friday, and both were sitting next to their wives at the time. Lincoln died at Ford's Theater, and Kennedy died in a Lincoln car, which was made by the Ford Motor Company. Both had been accompanied by another couple, the male in each couple being wounded in the attack as well. And both of their successors were named Johnson. Lincoln was succeeded by Andrew Johnson, and Kennedy was succeeded by Lyndon B. Johnson. Lastly, the names Lincoln and Kennedy each have 7 letters. That's not a big one, but there's tons of others. Just read about it, it's nuts.
Next on our list, we have the striking life of Walter Summerford, and when I say striking, I mean it. Summerford was a British officer and a major in the British Army during World War I, who was struck by lightning 4 separate times on 4 separate occasions, 3 times when he was alive. The first time Summerford was struck was on the battlefield in 1981, after which he was paralyzed from the waist down. But luckily for him, after his retirement, he was rehabilitated, and after a while, he regained the ability to walk. Unluckily for him, just 6 years later, he was struck by lightning for a second time, and he became paralyzed on the right side of his body. Again, in time, he was able to regain the ability to walk and lived a normal life. Up until 1930, that is, when he was struck by lightning for a 3rd time while trying to walk through a park in Vancouver. This time he was paralyzed completely, and he remained bedridden until his death just 2 years later. He was laid to rest in a cemetery and given a gravestone that read, "In loving memory," although it's pretty hard to make it out now considering the fact that shortly after his burial, his gravestone was struck by lightning and split into 3 distinct pieces, one for each time he was struck while alive. Pretty strange coincidence.
Edgar Allan Poe is legendary when it comes to his fantastical tales of the dark and macabre, but in this case, truth was stranger than fiction because it was eerily close to a fictional work. In 1838, Poe wrote a novel called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. It's about a young man named Arthur Pym who goes on a sea voyage. In one part of the story, though, the crew of Pym's ship finds themselves in a desperate situation. They're stranded without food, so they decide to draw straws to see who will be sacrificed so the others can survive. The unlucky one is the cabin boy named Richard Parker, who ends up being killed and eaten by the others. About 46 years later, in 1884, a real-life ship sank, and their survivors were stranded at sea, and just like in Poe's novel, the men found themselves without food and decided to draw straws to see who would be sacrificed. And who was chosen? It was a young sailor named Richard Parker. Need I say more?
The Curse of Tamerlane's Tomb is one of those eerie tales that makes you wonder if history sometimes has a supernatural twist. In 1941, Soviet archaeologists decided to open the tomb of Tamerlane, a formidable 14th century Turco-Mongol conqueror. Inside, they found a chilling inscription that read, quote, "Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Just 3 days later, an invasion of the Soviet Union began, leading many to believe that the curse had been triggered by disturbing the tomb. The timing was so uncanny that it's hard not to see it as something more than just coincidence. Interestingly, the curse is also linked to the Soviet victory in a major battle, which some attribute to Tamerlane's remains being reburied according to Islamic tradition shortly before the tide turned. Whether you believe in curses or not, the story of Tamerlane's tomb certainly adds a mysterious layer to the events of that extremely turbulent time in history. The King Umberto I coincidence is one of those stories that feels like it could only happen in a novel, but it's actually entirely true. In 1900, King Umberto I of Italy decided to dine at a small restaurant where he was astonished to find that the owner was his exact double. But the similarities didn't stop there. Both men shared the same name, were born on the same day in the same town, and even married women named Margarita. It's the kind of coincidence that makes you question whether the universe was playing some kind of cosmic joke. The next day, things took an even stranger turn. The restaurant owner was tragically shot and killed. Later, that very same day, King Umberto I met a similar fate as he was assassinated during a public event. The bizarre series of events leaves us wondering if this was more than just chance, a glitch in reality where two identical lives were eerily intertwined and ended in the same tragic manner. I don't know, it's insane. Like, I can't explain that at all. Not even the death thing is like crazy, but it's like, how did they have the same name, born on the same day, in the same town, married people of the same name? Like, that just, it's too much for me. The cross-country coincidence is one of those stories that seems too strange to be true. In 1975, Erskine Lawrence Eben was tragically struck and killed by a taxi while riding his moped in Bermuda. What makes this incident truly mind-boggling is that it was an almost exact replay of a tragedy that occurred exactly 1 year earlier. In 1974, Erskine's brother Neville was also riding that same moped in the same intersection when he was killed by the same taxi, driven by the same driver and even carrying the same passenger. I could not have said same more in that sentence. The chances of such a precise and tragic repetition are so astronomically low that it feels like reality just momentarily glitched, playing out the same fatal scenario twice as if stuck in a loop. It's like a nightmare Groundhog Day. This eerie coincidence leaves us wondering if there's something more at play, something beyond mere chance that defies our understanding of how the world works. If anybody knows, let me know. The phantom time hypothesis is one of the most mind-bending ideas to come out of historical theory, almost like it's from a science fiction novel. Proposed by historian Herbert Illig, this theory suggests that the period between 614 and 911 AD never actually happened. That it was just entirely fabricated. According to Illig, this would mean that we're not actually living in 2024, but rather in 1727, with nearly 300 years of history being nothing more than an elaborate collective illusion. The implications of this theory are staggering, as it would mean that events like Charlemagne's reign and the early Middle Ages were either exaggerated or just completely invented. This idea of a massive historical glitch where entire centuries were inserted into the timeline challenges everything we think we know about history. While mainstream historians remain skeptical, the phantom time hypothesis continues to fascinate those who enjoy pondering whether our understanding of the past, and by extension, our present, might be based on a glitch in reality itself. Just one other thing to send me into an existential crisis. I love it. Alright. The mystery of the London hammer is one of those puzzling discoveries that challenges our understanding of history and just leaves us questioning reality itself. In 1936, a hammer was found in London, Texas, but this wasn't just any ordinary tool. The hammer was embedded in rock that, according to geological estimates, is around 400 million years old. An era long before humans, let alone their tools, were supposed to exist. This bizarre find has baffled scientists and sparked all sorts of theories, from the possibility of time slips to the idea of alternate realities where different timelines somehow intersected. How could a man-made object end up trapped in ancient rock? The hammer's presence in such an anachronistic setting is more than just a curiosity, it is a mystery that seems to defy the laws of time and logic, making me wonder if it's evidence of a glitch in the fabric of reality itself. I don't know. I can't explain any of these things we're speaking about. I'm just here to report the news and then stress about it later. The connection between Sir Anthony Hopkins and the girl from Petrovka is a story that feels like it was just lifted straight out of the movie itself. While preparing for his role in the film adaptation of the novel, Hopkins was eager to read the book to get a better understanding of his character, a real professional. However, despite searching everywhere, he couldn't find a copy. Then, in a very weird twist of fate, he stumbled upon a copy left on a random park bench, as if the universe had placed it there just for him. The story gets even stranger when Hopkins later met the book's author. During their conversation, the author mentioned that he had lent his last copy of the book to a friend who had unfortunately lost it on a park bench. The chances of Hopkins finding that very copy are so slim that it has to be a glitch in reality where the lines between coincidence and destiny blur. It just makes us wonder, is there some unseen force that was at play just ensuring that Hopkins got his hands on this very elusive book? I don't know, it's just too strange. I can't explain it, it freaks me out. The strange life of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette is filled with many twists and turns, but one particular coincidence stands out as almost too eerie to ignore. On June 21st, 1791, the royal couple was arrested while attempting to escape from France during the height of the French Revolution, a moment that marked the beginning of their tragic downfall. However, what makes this event even more uncanny is a seemingly innocent diary entry made by Louis XVI exactly 18 years earlier. On that same day, June 21st, Louis wrote that he hoped never to undertake a journey on that day again, as if he had some premonition of what the future held. Fast forward almost 2 decades, and the date he had hoped to avoid became the very day his fate was sealed. This peculiar coincidence adds a mysterious layer to their story, making me wonder if this was more than just a quirk of history, perhaps a glitch in reality, where destiny and foresight collided in an unforgettable way. The mysterious case of Joseph Figlock is a story that almost defies belief. In 1950, Figlock, an ordinary man in Detroit, was walking down the street when out of nowhere, a baby fell from a high window and landed directly on him. Both he and the baby survived the frightening incident, okay, don't freak out, with Figlock's presence likely having saved the child's life. As if this wasn't bizarre enough, a year later, Figlock found himself in an almost identical situation. Once again, he was walking the same street and another baby fell from the exact same window and landed on him. Incredibly, both he and the baby survived this second fall as well. The odds of such an event happening once are super low, but twice? It's the kind of coincidence that makes you wonder if reality just glitched. You know, we're back in the loop, we're back in Groundhog's Day. At least this one has a happy ending though, you know? That's something I can get behind. Edgar Allan Poe's novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, written in 1838, tells the haunting tale of a shipwreck where the desperate survivors, driven to the brink, resort to consuming one of their own, ultimately sacrificing a cabin boy named Richard Parker. As eerie as this fictional story is, reality took a chilling turn nearly 50 years later when, in 1884, a real shipwreck unfolded under strikingly similar circumstances. The survivors, stranded and starving, made the harrowing decision to kill and consume one of their own to stay alive. In a twist that seems almost too bizarre to be true, the unfortunate victim was also a cabin boy, and his name was Richard Parker. The uncanny resemblance between Poe's dark fiction and the grim reality that followed has led many to wonder if this was more than just a coincidence. Honestly, I myself, since I heard this story a few years ago, have been convinced that Edgar Allan Poe's a time traveler. I don't know, that seems more logical than anything else, which is crazy to say. The case of the Carol A. Deering is one of those maritime mysteries that continues to baffle and intrigue, and if you've been a fan of this channel for a while, you've definitely heard the story of the Carol A. Deering before. In 1921, the Carol A. Deering, a commercial schooner, was found mysteriously aground off the coast of North Carolina, with its crew having vanished without a trace. The ship was in good condition, the food was laid out as if the crew had simply just stepped away, yet there was no sign of the men men anywhere. What makes this case even stranger is that another ship, the SS Hewitt, disappeared around the same time and in the same general area, adding to the sense that something otherworldly might have been at play. These two eerie events happening so close together have fueled theories of mysterious phenomenon. Whether it was a Bermuda Triangle type scenario or an interdimensional glitch or I don't know, something else entirely. The Carol A. Deering remains a haunting reminder that some corners of history might just be too strange to fully understand, leaving us to wonder if these events were part of a reality that momentarily went off script.
Starting off this countdown, we have Thomas W. Lawson. Thomas W. Lawson was a British stockbroker who in 1907 published a book called Friday the 13th. The story was about a stockbroker who tried to make the entire stock market crash on Friday the 13th, hence the name of the book. Little did he know that he would eerily predict the future. On Friday, December 13th of 1907, a ship named Thomas W. Lawson, named after a completely different Thomas W. Lawson, not the author, set sail on her first transatlantic voyage. That day, she sank. Isn't that bizarre? A ship named Thomas W. Lawson crashed and sunk on Friday the 13th. I'm telling you, this guy predicted the future whether he meant to or not. Moving on to number 9, we have the start and end of America's Civil War. In July of 1861, Wilmer McLean's Virginia home was involved in the first battle of Bull Run. In fact, the general of the battle wrote a diary entry about a cannonball crashing through McLean's kitchen. He wrote, and I quote, "A federal shell fell into the fireplace of my headquarters at the McLean house." Now, due to safety reasons, McLean moved his family home from the front lines to a new home in Appomattox County. Well, guess what? The battle ended up ending in his parlor in 1865. So it started in his backyard and ended in his parlor. So he was involved in the beginning and the end. Moving on to number 8, we have the birth chart. This story was shared by Raina Lee R on Reddit. So according to her, her brother's doctor would always get his chart mixed up at the office. And that's because there was another kid under his care with the same first and last name. To make things weirder, they were both born on the same day, just different months of the same year. And their mothers had the same name. What are the odds of that? I'll be saying that a lot in this video, so get used to it. But for someone to have the same first and last name as you, it's absolutely wild. And the same doctor. I just hope that they met and became best friends. Coming in at number 7, we have The Marks. This story was shared by Pata95 Nishta on Reddit. And this story is about to blow your mind. So according to her, her best friend from elementary school has 3 sisters. All 3 sisters grew up to marry engineers. Not only that, but all of their husbands were named Mark. And her best friend, I guess, followed this tradition because when she got older, she also married an engineer named Mark. What are the odds that all husbands' names were Mark and all of them are engineers? This is wild to me. Like, did the sisters do that on purpose? Are all engineers just named Mark? Also, that must be so confusing at family get-togethers and dinners. In our 6th spot, we have the meteor. So it's said that the odds of being hit by a meteor is 1 in 840 million. So the odds of this happening are very, very, very slim. It's next to impossible. Well, the impossible happened to a family in France. One night they were hit by a meteor which had been flying through space for more than 4.5 billion years without hitting a target. Then all of a sudden it just crashed into their home. Thankfully, no one was hurt. The odd part here is that the family's last name was Comet. So out of all families and homes to hit, it hit the family with the name Comet. That is truly bizarre. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Anthony Hopkins. In the early 1970s, Anthony Hopkins was casted to play Koista in The Girl from Petrovka. This film was based on the book of the same name. Now, to prepare for the role, he was going to read the book. However, he was unable to find any copy of the book in any bookstore. He searched all over the place, but to no avail. Then, randomly one day, as he was sitting in the London tube station, he found a copy of that book just laying around. Not only that, but when he opened the book, he found that it was signed by its author. Literally, the universe brought him what he was looking for. What are the odds of someone leaving that book behind and then Anthony finding it? The very book he was desperately looking for. Coming in at number 4, we have the close calls. In 2014, Dutch cyclist Martin de Jong had plans to head from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. He was scheduled to be on Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. But before his flight, he bumped his ticket up to catch a later flight because it was cheaper. That is the airline that was shot down while flying over eastern Ukraine. All passengers lost their lives. That's not all. In March, he had a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Again, he decided to bump his ticket up at the last minute to get a cheaper deal. And it's a good thing that he did. He was scheduled to be on Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, the one that disappeared, never to be seen again. So Martin escaped death twice, all because he wanted a better deal and save some money. He's a lucky, lucky man, but also unlucky that he was supposed to be on both of those flights. In our third spot, we have the plum pudding. Mathematician Joseph Mazur shared this creepy coincidence involving French poet Émile Deschamps with plum pudding in his book Fluke. So back in the day, a man named Émile was first introduced to plum pudding by a man named Mr. de Forgebus. From that moment on, every time he had plum pudding, he would encounter Mr. de Forgebus, and I hope I'm saying his name right. The second time he had plum pudding, he was at a restaurant and ordered it, but the waiter was like, "Sorry, we just sold the last pudding to this man," and points to the back of the restaurant. Lo and behold, it was Mr. de Forgebus. A decade later, he went to a dinner party, and at the party, they were serving plum pudding. Émile made a joke like, "Who's this party for, Mr. de Forgebus?" And at that very moment, he walked through the door. But he wasn't even supposed to be at that party. He had accidentally come to the wrong door on his way to another dinner party. So what are the odds that every time that this man had plum pudding, Mr. de Forgebus was there? It's kind of like Beetlejuice, you know, you say his name 3 times and he'll appear, except in this case, you have plum pudding and he'll appear. Moving on to number 2, we have Flight 666. Now this one gives me the absolute creeps. On Friday the 13th, Flight 666 departed from Copenhagen and landed in Helsinki, aka H-E-L, hell. Let me say that again for you. Flight 666 flew to hell on Friday the 13th. I don't know about you, but if I was scheduled on that flight, I would cancel immediately. I ain't taking no chances. But thankfully, the flight landed safely in Helsinki. Thank gosh it did, because that seems like one cursed flight. It's plain creepy how it lined up exactly like that. Pun intended, get it? Plain creepy. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the prediction of James Dean's death. On September 30th, 1955, James Dean died in a car accident. He was only 24 years old. And it seems like a man named Alec Guinness actually predicted this would happen. He warned Dean and said, and I quote, "If you get in that car, you will be found dead in it by this time next week." A week later, Dean was involved in a terrible car accident and he sadly lost his life. In fact, Alec had said that the car was sinister, and I think he's right. Later, parts of the car were recovered and resold and placed into other cars. All the car owners who had parts of James Dean's car were also involved in deadly crashes. Not only that, but the mechanic working on the car died after the car rolled off the back of a truck and crushed the legs of the mechanic. So Alec was onto something here and tried to warn Dean.
Number 10, twins named Jim. Okay, we'll kick this part 2 off on a lighter note. This one gets a little dark, so we'll ease our way in, you know? The twins named Jim. Okay, that sounds like a 2026 comedy hit already. Back in 1979, a set of twins were reunited when they were 39 years old at the time. This was of course a big moment in their lives. For 37 years, they barely knew of each other's existence. Then when they finally met, the long lost twins had more in common than they could have ever thought. For starters, both had been named Jim. I spoiled that in the fun title earlier. But their adoptive parents both named the lads Jim. That's insane. Jim? Like of all names, really? And both Jims just happened to love math and carpentry. Both also had jobs and security. And both also had ex-wives named Linda. And they both since married a woman named Betty. This isn't like, what? Imagine meeting another you, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I also love knitting and Autobots. What are the odds?" No, that's too eerie. You're an alien clone. Something's afoot here. Get out of here. Not just meeting a long-lost twin at 40. No way. Number 9, Stephen Hawking. Time is relative and fascinating, and all that confusing stuff. There's so many components of our universe that we still don't even understand. James Webb is out here making people turn to atheists all of a sudden. The universe is bigger than we all think, yet somehow it still gives us these once-in-a-lifetime coincidences. Or as I say, coincidentals. Stephen Hawking's death occurred on Einstein's 139th birthday, which is also Galileo's 300th death day, and also Pi Day. This was March 14th. My dad has the same birthday as Daniel Radcliffe, and they're both wizards, so I don't know. Just saying. These birthday coincidences are getting out of hand. Coincidences, coincidences, coincidences. There it is, he's got it. Number 8, atomic survivor. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the United States detonated 2 nuclear explosives over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This, of course, was devastating. The results in this reaction, the blast and the radiation they both caused, took the lives of nearly 90,000 people. It was horrible. But in 2009, the Japanese government confirms that there was at least one man who was in each city on both days of the reactions, and he lived to tell the tale. On August 6th, Satomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on a business trip. As I was walking alone, I heard the sound of a plane. Just one, he told a British newspaper. I looked up into the sky and I saw the B-29 and it dropped 2 parachutes. I was looking up into the sky at them and suddenly it was like a flash of magnesium, a great flash in the sky, and I was blown over just like that. And by August 9th, he had returned home to Nagasaki only to experience the trauma for a second time. Despite the double radiation exposure, Yamaguchi lived to be 93 years old, which is incredible. He sadly passed away from stomach cancer. Number 7, Julianne Kopka. Miss Julianne has a 2-for-1 when it comes to survival stories. I had to include it. Her story starts out on Christmas Eve, a lovely day, 1971, when she was just a teenager and she was on Lanza Flight 508. Now the plane was struck by lightning, which is an actual nightmare situation that I didn't know could happen, and this led to the plane starting to disintegrate midair. It was all bad. In what felt like the blink of an eye for Julianne, she found herself still strapped to her seat 2 miles above the Peruvian rainforest. She was injured, of course, full of bruises, a broken collarbone, but she was alive after she landed. And in fact, she was the only person who had been on the flight that was still alive. Just fell out of a plane and lived to tell. That is crazy. That is bat insane. But it's like you're out of the fire into the frying pan at this point, right? Now you're in the wilderness all alone with no food, just, a little bit of candy, if anything, from the plane. Julianne had found a small stream which she began to wade in downstream. She traveled along it, and the insects in the jungle were eating her alive, and sorry, this next part is gross, but maggots had infected her arm. It was like bad, worse, even worse. Now we're flowing down a river and maggots are eating me. This is incredible. Julianne ended up coming across a sort of encampment where she found a few supplies, and she was so smart and was able to give herself a little bit of first aid, which included pouring gasoline on the infected arm, which then led to all the, disgusting bugs and maggots leaving it. Because they're like, hey, I'm not a fan of gasoline. Lunch is over. See you later. And then just a few hours later, a few lumber workers found her, and they gave her more first aid treatment and took her to an area that was more populated, where she was then airlifted for medical treatment. Now, in 2000, her story was told through the documentary titled Wings of Hope, which was directed by Werner Herzog, who particularly took interest in the story because, 1, it's obviously incredible. As I was just explaining it, I read this and I'm like, it's crazy. But 2, Werner Herzog also had a seat booked on that flight, and he would have been on that same flight if it wasn't for a last-minute change of plans. I can't even, that should be number 1, really. Number 6, Comet family. Okay, this one's good. The odds of being hit or killed by a meteor are 1 in 2 million, or something like that, right? It's crazy. But even so, back in 1954, residents in Talladega County, Alabama, noticed a ball of fire heading towards the Earth. Now, back then we didn't have Twitter, right? We couldn't warn anybody that a meteor was possibly gonna hit us. We also really didn't know if it was gonna hit or not, or how big it was, so it was alarming. Especially for Anne Elizabeth Hodges, who got hit by said space rock. Yeah, she only got grazed, but with these odds, it's still possible. Wild. Now, cut to recent history, the Comet family in France. Their house was hit by a meteor. I'll say that again. The Comet family was hit by a... You get it, there we go. As somebody with the last name McWaters, I'm a little worried that I might drown now. I don't know. Last names seem to be a little bit of a tip-off, it seems. And number 5, World Cup. An episode from The Simpsons back in 1997 called The Cartridge Family shows Mexico and Portugal going head-to-head in football. Like soccer football, not like, football. You get it. Springfield residents are told to go see this match to determine which nation is the greatest on Earth, Mexico or Portugal. So when the 2018 World Cup then rolled around much later, pun intended, fans were excited that this was now coming true, but at the same time had a laugh determining that Ronaldo must have missed that penalty intentionally so that the prediction would come true. That's like the theory now, that Ronaldo missed to make The Simpsons correct. A lot of theories for that one, it's always fun. But recently it's been announced that Qatar will host a tournament in November and December 2022 rather than usual June-July dates. Another World Cup, another chance for The Simpsons to add another prediction to their already impressive list. That's a creepy show. I have another Simpsons one coming up, but we'll see. Number 4, Mars life. We're back. There it is. There's the next Simpson one. That fast. There we go. Let me ask you lovely people a question. If you could go to Mars right now with like 3 of your friends, would you do it? Keep in mind it's really boring, and unless you're an astronaut botanist like Matt Damon, you'll probably have a rough go. But in the future, would you do it? I would. I'd go. I'd go with like one person, you know? 4's too many, that's too much. Going to Mars might be as simple as going to the mall. Apparently, The Simpsons have an episode where they show a family visit to the big red planet come 2051. But honestly, I feel like we're gonna get there a lot sooner. SpaceX is already planning to send people out there. It's a quick, 9-month trip, so make sure your phone's charged. But it's actually more beneficial for the team to travel during these peak times in the 2030s and in the 2050s. Because during these years, trips to the planet will be shorter and they'll coincide with periods of the solar maximum. So while this one may or may not come true in 2022, well, let me tell you, it's right around the corner. Or maybe in 2050. Who knows? Number 3, Titanic inspection card. This inspection card once belonged to a woman named Marion Meanwell. And you're probably thinking, what could possibly be worrisome or, creepy about an inspection card? Well, it shows how Marion was not intended to be on the Titanic that fateful day, but by some turn of events, she unfortunately found herself as one of the passengers. The card shows that she was originally meant to be traveling on a ship called the Majestic, and for some reason the trip she originally had planned was delayed, and now she instead was assigned to the ill-fated Titanic. The eerie part is you can see the word Majestic was crossed out on her card, which then shows us the change in plans. If only people were able to see what was about to strike and they could have somehow warned her. That's the creepy thing about these coincidences. Sometimes they're just bad, You could fall out of a plane and have maggots all over you and survive, or you could go from one cursed ship to another. Number 2, Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, this is a story that actually convinced me that Edgar Allan Poe is for real a time traveler, so buckle up, grab a soda. Because 2 separate stories that he wrote both turned out to be exceptionally true and real, but not until after they'd been written. Yeah, it's a good one. Firstly, Poe's only completed novel was published in 1838, and it tells the tale of mutiny on a whaling ship lost at sea. These men on a ship realize that they're doomed and need to resort to extreme measures in order to stay alive. So they begin drawing straws to see who they're going to sacrifice to save food. A boy named Richard Parker drew the shortest straw and therefore became the next meal. Dark, let's move on. Let's fast forward to 46 years now to 1884, and in real life also, I might add. There are now 4 men who have been set adrift after the sinking of a yacht. These men found themselves in a similar predicament to the novels, and I kid you not, they ended up taking the same route and elected to sacrifice a cabin boy. A cabin boy also named Richard Parker. Odd, right? Okay. Cut to 1840, Poe penned the gruesome story The Businessman, in which the narrator suffers a traumatic head injury in his youth, and then later a violent life follows. The weird thing about this story is that Edgar Allan Poe fully understood, or so it seemed, frontal lobe injury. Now this was long before it was ever even studied or looked at, right? This type of study didn't arrive until 1848. An actual neurologist, Eric Altschuler, recently wrote how there's a dozen symptoms and he knew every single one. It's so exact and it's so weird, it's like he had a time machine. End quote. Yeah, it's almost like he had a time machine. Did he? And finally, number 1, Simpsons dome in real life. Yep, this one's gonna hit home. Let's do it. This one's gonna hit dome. That didn't work. For this one, we're looking at the Simpsons movie, which still holds up. That's a fun time. But even over the pandemic, I saw personal domes come to life, right? It was so weird. Restaurants were making these like weird tents on sidewalks just to stay in business. But an even bigger idea came long before this. Back in the 70s, there were talks about putting a dome over Manhattan. This massive dome over Midtown that regulates weather and pollution, all that good stuff. Now, if that had been built, imagine what we would have done with it during the initial breakout during this pandemic. It would have been madness. And then in 2010, later on, the city called Eco City 2020 was planned out. It was supposed to be built in Siberia. It was announced in 2014 officially, this climate controlled, domed city, 4.5 square kilometers, all that good stuff. But since 2016, the project lost the funding. What do you guys think? Should we bring back domes and just, have a little personal bubble everywhere we go? Just lose the umbrella and live in a big glass ball forever over our city? I'd do it, that'd be kind of nice. It'd be like living in a Coca-Cola mist zone your entire life. Just kind of like, ooh, this is nice. Kicking off the list at number 10, the Hoover Dam coincidence. We'll kick this list off on a grim note because why not? The Hoover Dam, okay, this massive accomplishment. Its first victim, sadly, was a man named J.G. Tierney. It was December 20th, 1922, and the official death toll from industrial accidents during the construction of the dam from 1921 to 1935 was sadly around the 200 number. It was a lot of deaths. It was pretty sad. The earliest and latest victims of the construction were both father and son. And if that's not coincidence enough, both of them died on the exact same day. They both passed on December 20th. J.G. Tierney sadly drowned while conducting surveys in the Colorado River, and then 13 years later, Patrick Tierney fell off an intake tower right before construction was complete. Grim start, but stay tuned, we have a lot more. Number 9, legendary musical neighbors. It's weird how similar some of your neighbors are, right? Like growing up, we had 3 Davids on our street. They all loved cutting their lawn at 7 a.m. What a coincidence, right? We all hated them. What a coincidence. Well, the 60s rock icon Jimi Hendrix and the 18th century composer George Friedrich Handel, they were both neighbors. A couple hundred years apart, but they were both neighbors indeed. They lived in 23 Brook Street and 25 Brook Street in London. What are the odds, right? Had George had been born 200 years later, we would have gotten the greatest collab of all time. Yeah, if you're local, of course you'll know there's a site there now. It's a famous landmark, but in terms of coincidences, there's music in the air on Brook Street. Something's going on. Kind of want to walk by and see if I'm better at playing the flute. Maybe I could play the flute on that block, who knows. Number 5, Civil War coincidence. There's another war coincidence in this list, but I saved that for number 1 because it's too good. But this one here is also pretty insane. The Civil War began in 1861 with the first Battle of Bull Run. The Bull Run is a stream that passes through the farm of a 46-year-old Wilmer McLean. Passes through his farm, right? The Bull Run is a stream that passes through the farm of a 46-year-old Wilmer McLean. This property was in Virginia. Now, of course, once the dust settled, the property was destroyed, so McLean left his home with his wife, and for nearly 4 years, the pair were considered safe while the war was otherwise changing history. Then in 1865, the war came to a close when Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse, which at the time was literally steps away from McLean's new property. Yeah, he saw the beginning and the end of the Civil War by accident. He saw it front row too. What are the odds? Number 4, George D. Bryson. Back in the 50s, this story was spread all over Kentucky. Back in the 50s in Louisville, a man named George D. Bryson was checking into a hotel room. Now he walked up and asked if there was any mail for him, which on one hand is an excellent bit. I'm gonna do that next time I go to a hotel for sure. Hey, got any mail? Classic, because you're just visiting them one time. There's no way there's gonna be mail. That's the joke, right? Except this time, there was. This time the hotel manager said yes, and there was in fact mail from the previous occupant of the room, who had also had the same name, George D. Bryson. Yeah. What are the odds, right? I remember one time I met another McWaters, and he was not related to me, and he also was not thrilled that we had the same name at all. It was the most bizarre thing. I was like, hey, can we talk about this? He's like, yeah, cool. I'm like, are you my brother? I don't want you to be anymore. Get out of here. Then I got Kyle, and I was like, you know what? Change your name. Now you're my new brother. Replace this guy. Number 3, Yanni and Laurel. Before we wrap up this curious list, we have to throw a fun recent one in as well. Remember this Yanni Laurel thing back in 2018? I only heard Yanni for like 2 weeks straight. I heard Yanni. That's it. For 2 weeks, guaranteed. I was determined that it was Yanni, okay? And then one day I listened and it was Laurel, and then I couldn't go back. It was just Laurel all of a sudden. Like it immediately just changed. It was a completely different word. I felt sick. I was like, is this real life? How is this happening? This got everybody talking. What is this phenomenon that happens? Same with the dress mishap. What is going on? Well, many believe these viral illusions are proof that we're living in a simulation. Yeah, these arguments, the dress is blue, no it's white, these situations prove that we perceive reality in our own individual way. Everybody is living an individual perceived reality, so sometimes it doesn't always align. Sometimes we hear what we want to hear. Sometimes we hear Yanni, and then sometimes we hear Laurel, and it's completely different for some reason. I can't go back now, it's the worst. God, I hated this so much. The dress was back in 2015, then Yanni Laurel was 2018. I don't know, we're due for another glitch in the matrix any day now. I come back next week, I have a different first name all of a sudden, you're like, what? Number 2, miss unsinkable. It's one thing to narrowly miss a natural disaster or a massive accident, but to not miss a tragedy 3 times in a row, that sounds like a curse if you ask me. That's for sure a curse. Violet Jessop, this brave soul survived 3 major ship disasters soldiers in history. She was born in 1887 in Argentina, and Jessop contracted tuberculosis at a young age and wasn't expected to live longer than a few months. She beat those odds and lived a healthy, relatively long life, which is shocking considering what I'm about to tell you. Violet, first of all, had a hard time getting hired as a stewardess on a ship because her youth and good looks were feared to distract crew and passengers. Yeah, you're too good looking to work on a ship. Welcome to the 1900s, I guess. Eventually, she got hired in 1910 to work aboard the HMS Olympic. Now, a year later, the Olympic collided with HMS Hawk, and the ship barely made it to shore. It was a tragedy. It was a huge disaster. Violet then served as a nurse aboard the Britannic right before World War I. The ship then collided with a German mine, and Violet jumped overboard and somehow survived with a fractured skull in the water and swam to safety. Afterwards, Violet worked on the Titanic, and on April 14th, 1912, she escaped another disaster on lifeboat 16. I mean, like, the odds that you survive 3 times in a row is one thing, but to experience 3 of those in a row? Huh. And finally, number 1. World War I soldiers. We have to finish on a grim note because this one is one of the most bizarre, in my opinion. When the First World War ended, the amount of British lives lost were around 1 million souls. The first reported casualty of World War I was a soldier named John Parr. And then after a countless number of lives were lost, the last soldier to die was a man named George Edwin Ellison. Now, both heroes' resting places are both in the St. Symphorian Military Cemetery, and they just happen to be 15 feet apart. And of course, this was not planned, nor were any of the entries on our list. It's just another bizarre coincidence that was discovered after the fact.
Starting off this countdown, we have the married couple's parents. This story surrounds a couple named Stephen and Helen Lee. A couple of years ago, the pair got engaged when they learned something very freaky about their families. While going through family photos during their engagement party, they found photos of their parents together. Turns out that Stephen's father and Helen's mom had actually dated and were set to get married in Korea in the 1960s. But their parents' disapproved, so they didn't. Had they not disapproved, the couple would have never been born. Not only that, but what are the odds that they got together after their parents had already gotten together? Kinda awkward if you ask me. Moving on at number 9, we have the church fire. On March 1st of 1950 at 7:25 p.m., a church exploded in Beatrice, Nebraska. At 7:20, a choir practice had begun, except none of the 15 choir members were there. And it's lucky that they weren't, or else they would have perished in the fire. Turns out that all 15 members arrived late due to personal reasons. So they were nowhere near the church when it exploded. What are the odds that all 15 members were running late? This story could have ended in tragedy. Thankfully, it didn't. Moving on to number 8, we have the wedding vows. In 2007, Fred and Lynette Dubendorf were walking along a beach clearing up some litter when they found a message in a bottle. After they opened it, they found it contained the marriage vows of another couple. Upon closer inspection, they found that their marriage dates matched. The couple who created the vows in the bottle were married on August 18th of that year. The Dubendorfs were married August 18th of 1979. Both couples were also married on beaches. The Dubendorfs were in complete shock and actually reached out to the other couple. Thankfully, the couple left their address in the bottle. Both couples now believe that their marriages were meant to be, especially Matt and Melody, the couple that wrote the vows in a bottle, who had several failed marriages before finding each other. They were skeptical about getting married again, but this to them is a sign that it was meant to be. Moving on to number 7, we have Edgar Allan Poe. This is one of the freakiest coincidences I have ever read about. So in 1838, Edgar Allan Poe wrote his only complete novel. It was called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. The book was about Arthur Pym, who goes on a nautical adventure. He hops on a boat as a stowaway and hides out there. But while aboard the ship, a mutiny occurs and a number of crew members lose their life. There's only 4 members aboard the ship now. One of the men was named Richard Parker. They kept him alive to help them control the ship. However, they encountered a terrible storm and things went south. The remaining 4 people on board are struggling to find food. So Richard was like, let's draw straws. Whoever gets the shortest straw will be killed and the others can eat them. So they did as Richard said, and he ended up drawing the shortest straw and then was eaten by his crew members. Believe it or not, but 46 years after that book was published, this happened in real life. In May of 1884, 4 men were traveling from England to Australia when they found themselves fighting for their lives. The men decided to draw straws and see who they should eat. The cabin boy drew the smallest straw. What was the cabin boy's name? Richard Parker. the same name as the guy who got eaten in the book. What are the odds of that? Is Edgar Allan Poe a psychic, or did he write history, or both? Moving on to number 6, we have Redbox. This story comes from Matinee25 on Reddit. A couple of years ago, her and her friend went to Redbox to see if they could rent the movie Tron. For those of you who don't know what Redbox is, basically it's an American video rental company that has these little kiosks you can go to and pick what movie you want, and then you can rent it and you'll get the DVD. So they went there, but they found out that they didn't have Tron. So they were like, okay, screw it, let's just rent another movie. Well, when they opened up the DVD case, turns out that inside was the movie Tron. Someone had put it back in the wrong case. But what are the odds? Because that's the movie that they wanted to see in the first place. Like, out of all the DVDs they could have gotten, they got the one with the switched disc. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the lucky numbers. So this story comes from Yamletf on Reddit. According to them, they were working as a call center operator when they asked the caller for her birthday. The caller said it was April 20th, which was the same birthday as the operator. When the next caller rang in, their birthday was April 27th, which was the same birthday as the operator's brothers. So at this point, the operator was like, okay, what is going on? And then the caller told her that maybe it's a sign and that she should go play the lottery with those dates. And that night, she went to the grocery store, played with those numbers, and ended up winning. It was only $380, but still, that's better than nothing. What are the odds that the winning numbers correlated to the caller's birthdays? In our 4th spot, we have the birthdays. According to a woman named Carrie Lee Simmons, her and her best friend share a number of eerie similarities. First, they both have the same birthdays. Not only that, but turns out that they were born in the same hospital, and their mothers shared the same recovery room. Keep in mind that their mothers were complete strangers. Then, 17 years later, the two connected and became best friends. When they found out that they were practically born beside each other, they completely freaked out. That's how you know that friendship is meant to be. In our 3rd spot, we have The Sign. This next story is from Reddit user EricFP23. So the day in which her grandfather died, her mother had been sitting in bed next to him, comforting him. Before he passed, she whispered to him, "Tell Richie I say hi." Richie was her ex-husband who had passed away a couple years earlier. A couple of days after her grandfather's passing, Erica and her mom were at Walgreens when all of a sudden a huge truck drove by with some writing written on the side of it. It read, "Richie says hi." I am speechless. Like, that's just goosebumps. And Erica and her mom were speechless too. It's either just a super eerie coincidence or Richie sent that message from the grave. Moving on to number 2, we have the taxi driver. I'm sorry, but this one is a little depressing compared to the other stories on today's list. In 1974, a man was riding his moped scooter in Bermuda when he was struck and killed by a taxi. 1 year later, his twin brother was riding the exact same scooter when he was struck and killed by a taxi as well. The taxi was driven by the exact same driver who took his brother's life. So not only did the twins die the exact same way, but they had been killed by the exact same person. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the life savior. When Su Weifang of China was 50 years old, he was outside near a river by his home when he saw a boy drowning. So he jumped in and saved his life. 30 years later, he rescued another boy from the river. This boy had slipped and fell into the river and didn't know how to swim. Once again, Weifang jumped in and saved this boy's life. Well, turns out that the two people he saved were related. They were father and son. 30 years ago, he saved the boy's father from drowning. Then, he saved the father's son from drowning in the same river. So they believe that this man is their guardian angel. Starting off this countdown, we have Jean-Marie Dubarry. On February 13th, 1746, a French man named Jean-Marie was executed for the murder of his father. Hundreds of years later, on the exact same day, a man named Jean-Marie Dubarry was also sentenced to death. He had also taken the life of his father. So what are the odds that two unrelated people with the same name both killed their fathers and then got executed on the same day? Like, that is just way too freaky. In our 9th spot, we have the dollar bill. Now, this is a pretty wholesome one for you all. When a woman named Esther was young, she had written her name on a couple of dollar bills after a bad breakup. She then told herself that she was going to marry the man that brought the bill back to her. Well, years later, she was dating a man named Paul Gratchen. The day he asked Esther to be his girlfriend, they were at a sandwich shop. As he was paying for the meal, he got handed a dollar bill with the name Esther written on it. the bill she wrote years prior. And in the end, they ended up getting married. Now, how wholesome is that? The universe literally gave her what she had manifested. Coming in at number 8, we have the girls with the red balloon. In 2001, a 10-year-old girl named Laura Buxton decided to release a red balloon from her front yard with a message on it. The balloon said, "Please return to Laura Buxton," and it had her address written on it. Well, this balloon traveled 140 miles and ended up landing on the yard of another 10-year-old girl's house. This girl's name was also Laura Buxton. Like, what are the odds? The two Laura Buxtons ended up meeting and they discovered that they had tons of similarities, not just their age and name. For example, they both had a guinea pig, a gray rabbit, and a 3-year-old chocolate lab. They both also looked alike and dressed alike. I'm telling you, this is just way too freaky. Like, what are the odds? I'm gonna be saying that a lot in this video. What are the odds? Moving on to number 7, we have Mark Twain and Halley's Comet. Every 76 years, Halley's Comet is visible to the naked eye as it soars past Earth. Well, American writer Mark Twain was born on one of Halley's Comets passing in 1835. The next year that the comet was said to pass was in 1910, and Mark Twain predicted that he was going to die that year. He said that he came into the world with the comet and that he was going to leave the world with the comet as well. And Mark Twain was right. Mark Twain passed one day after the comet's closest approach in 1910. So not only did Mark Twain predict his own death, but his birth and death both seamlessly lined up with Halley's Comet. How freaky. In our 6th spot, we have Violet Jessop. Violet Jessop has been named the luckiest woman as well as the unluckiest woman. She also has been given the name Miss Unsinkable, and I'll explain how she got those nicknames in just a second. So Violet was a stewardess and nurse who was on board 3 big sister ships when disaster struck each of them. It started with the HMS Olympic. She was on board the ship when it collided with the HMS Hawk. Then she was on the HMHS Britannic when it struck a mine at sea. And lastly, she was on board the Titanic, and she managed to escape all 3 of these disasters. At this point, she probably was cursed, and after the first accident, she shouldn't have gotten back on any ships ever again. So that's why she's been given the name the luckiest, unluckiest woman to live. She's been lucky to survive all the accidents, but unlucky that they kept happening to her. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Daniel du Toit. The irony behind this next story is mind-blowing. So Daniel du Toit was a South African astronomer. Over his life, he discovered and co-discovered several comets. He also spent his days giving lectures. On September 28th, 1981, he gave a lecture on how death can strike anyone at any time. As soon as the lecture was done, he popped a mint into his mouth. The mint then slid to the back of his throat, he choked on it, and died right then and there. So yeah, I'd say his lecture was pretty spot on. In our 4th spot today, we have Harry Zigland. Now, this story is kind of controversial. Some say it's an old wives' tale. Others say that it actually did happen. Now, if it did happen, then this is the definition of karma. So back in the day, there was a man named Harry Zigland who broke a woman's heart. She was so heartbroken that she took her own life. Her brother was so devastated and angry at Harry that he vowed to get revenge on him. So he went out to find Harry with his gun and shot at him. Harry fell to the floor, and the brother, thinking that he had succeeded in killing him, grabbed his gun and took his own life. But Harry survived. The bullet didn't strike him. Instead, it hit and got lodged into a nearby tree. 3 years later, Henry was using dynamite to remove the tree. When he blew it up, the explosion sent the bullet out of the tree, and it hit and instantly killed him. It took karma 3 years, but it finally caught up to him. Coming in at number 3, we have the Hoover Dam. Over the course of the construction of the Hoover Dam, there were 96 deaths. The first death was of a man named J.G. or George Turney. It occurred on December 20th, 1922. He sadly lost his life after drowning in the dam. 14 years later, on the exact anniversary of this guy's death, his son, Patrick Turney, lost his life. He fell from an electrical tower and died. This was also the final death reported during the construction of the dam, meaning the first man to die and the last man were father and son, and it happened on the exact same day. Coming in at number 2, we have Jack Frost and Other Stories. Some things are just meant to be, and you'll believe this once you hear this next story. Children's book author Anne Parrish was with her husband in Paris when they stopped by an antique bookshop from the 1920s. While in there, she found a copy of Jack Frost and Other Stories. She told her husband that that was her favorite book as a child. Well, when he opened the book, it had her name written inside of it. It read Anne Parrish, 209N, Weber Street, Colorado Springs. So not only did it have Anne's name in the book, but it had the place she grew up in, Colorado Springs. Seems like Anne was meant to find that book. And in our number one spot today, we have the two presidents. It turns out that Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy share a lot of eerie coincidences. Besides the fact that they both were American presidents, they both were killed by a gunshot wound to the back of the head. They both passed away on a Friday. They both died before a celebration. Kennedy was assassinated on the eve of Thanksgiving. Lincoln died right before Easter. And each were accompanied by their wife and another couple when they were killed. But that's not all. They both had best friends named Billy Graham. Both Billies had 4 children, and they both had secretaries named after the other president. Kennedy's secretary was Miss Lincoln. Lincoln's secretary was John. But wait, there's even more. Both of their successors were vice presidents called Johnson. The freakiest coincidence, Lincoln was shot in Ford's Theater. Kennedy was shot in a Lincoln made by Ford. Starting off this countdown, we have the 4th of July. The 4th of July is a big celebration in America. The holiday marks the signing of the Declaration of Independence. But did you know that a lot of US figures have died on July 4th? In fact, 3 of the first 5 US presidents died on this date, 2 within hours of each other. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on July 4th, 1826. The 5th president, James Monroe, exactly 5 years later passed away as well. Seems to be a deadly date for presidents. Like, what are the odds? In our 9th spot, we have Barbary Shore. Barbary Shore is a novel written by Norman Mailer. It's about a character who rents a room in a Brooklyn boarding house in order to write a novel. Then a minor character is introduced, and it's his neighbor who turns out to be a Russian spy. Well, after the novel was finished, Mailer's neighbor was arrested for being a Russian spy and hiding out in his apartment, just like in the book he wrote. And he had no prior knowledge of his neighbor. Now that's freaky. In our 8th spot, we have The Omen. The Omen is a 1976 horror movie that caused a number of real-life tragedies. As a result, it's been called a real-life horror movie or a cursed one. A number of the cast members got into horrific accidents. For example, special effects consultant John Richardson got into a crash, and his assistant, Liz Moore, was cut in half during an accident, similar to the death of a character in the actual film. That's not all. The screenwriter and executive producer were both on different planes that got struck by lightning on different occasions. It's just wild how so many cast and crew members experienced tragedy after working on the film. Is this a coincidence, or is the film actually cursed? In our 7th spot, we have William Shakespeare. More like William Shakespeare, because I was shook after hearing this. So Psalm 46 in the book of Psalm reads, "Here was I like a psalm." The freaky part is that this is an anagram for William Shakespeare. Arrange the letters and it spells his name. But wait, it gets weirder. The 46th word in Psalm 46 in the King James Bible is shake, and the 46th word from the end is spear. And how old was William Shakespeare when the King James Bible was first completed? He was 46 years old. So someone explain this to me. Please go ahead. Try and explain this. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with My Way. My Way is a beautiful song by Frank Sinatra, but it also might be cursed. Why do I say that? Well, at least 6 people were killed in the Philippines between 2000 and 2010 while singing My Way. Karaoke is a pretty popular pastime in the Philippines. However, this song is now associated with bad luck there. One time, a man was shot by a security guard for singing this song badly at a bar. Others were killed for hogging the microphone, and quite a few were killed for singing the song on repeat. Due to the repeated deaths, the song is actually banned from ever being sung or played in bars. In our 4th spot today, we have the license plate. World War I began after Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in his car on June 28, 1914. The car's license plate read AIII-118, which wasn't a big deal until people realized that this was the date that World War I ended. November 11th, 1918, aka 11/11/18, just like the license plate. Now, this car was placed in a museum in Austria, and it sat there for almost 2 decades before a British tourist noticed the significance of the license plate. So literally, World War I started and ended with this car. Coming in at number 3, we have Catherine and Mary Kelly. On November 28, 1888, a woman named Catherine Eddowes was arrested after being found drunk on the streets of London. When she was taken in by the police, she gave them a fake name. She told them her name was Mary Kelly. Later, she was released. However, that night she was murdered by none other than Jack the Ripper. The freakiest part is that that same night, Jack went on to kill another woman, none other than Mary Kelly, the random fake name that Catherine gave the police, who is actually a real person and also got killed. How scary, but also how tragic. In our second spot, we have the Disney lovers. In the early 2000s, engaged couple Alex and Donna were looking through some old photos when they came across one of Donna and her siblings at Disney. While in the background of the photo, they spotted none other than Alex and his family. Alex is the boy in the stroller being pushed by his father. So not only did they go to Disney at the same time, they just so happened to be in the same spot at the same time and got it on camera. I guess that's how you know that your love was meant to be. Years later, they decided to take their kids to Disney and recreate this iconic photo. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the lightning strike. There is a 1 in 500,000 chance of being hit by lightning. There's a 1 in 9 million chance of being struck by lightning twice. What about being struck by lightning 3 different times? This happened to a man named Major Walter Summerford. He was struck by lightning 3 different times throughout his life and survived. Not only that, but when he did pass away, his gravestone was also struck by lightning. What are the odds of that? Like, did he piss off Zeus or something?
Coming in at number 8, The Simpsons in general. One of the longest running TV shows in history, The Simpsons are notorious for somehow predicting outrageous events, including the president of the United States was going to be Donald Trump. If you watched the episode with Donald Trump as president today, you would probably have thought it was just another comedic, satirical episode of a TV show to do at the time. But the thing is, they wrote that sucker 19 years ago. How on earth did they guess that? With the show running for over 30 years, themes occurring in the show are eventually going to happen in real life, maybe. But this? They predicted a 3-eyed fish, a circus entertainer getting attacked mid-performance, even the Ebola outbreak. I think we can safely put down The Simpsons as one large coincidence, considering the amount they've had. They happen so often that the questions of whether they are psychic or actually secretly controlling events, I don't know, these are just things we need to know. Like right now. These kinds of coincidences just need an explanation. Coming in at number 6, we have Royce Burton. Are you ever right in the middle of telling a story when the very person you're talking about walks into the room? There are 2 subtle reactions. One, pretend you are talking about them, depending on what you're talking about, gossiping. Just pretend. What? Oh, what's that? Oh, who's that? Oh, hey! That's what you do. And the second one, you just look at them and go, oh, speak of the devil. Royce Burton had the latter reaction, though it's kind of cooler, when the very stranger who saved his life strolled in right as he mentioned him. Royce used to be a Texas Ranger, and one night while patrolling the Rio Grande in 1940, he got lost and tried to climb up the cliff to find his way. As he was nearing the edge, he almost fell, but then the hand of a man named Joe, reached out and hoisted him up. The 2 men lost contact when they both joined the war, and 25 years later, Burton had become a teacher and he was in the middle of the story when Joe strolled in. Not missing a beat, Burton said, I'll let Joe finish the story. And his whole class were like, what? These guys hadn't seen each other in 25 years. And apparently Joe had been looking for him, and the rest is the rest of the story you know. Coming in at number 5, you know when you meet that special someone and you just know you're meant to be. Some people are so lucky, and this couple got a physical sign that they were in the right place at the right time. Melody Kloska and Matt Burr were married on August 18th on the beautiful Wisconsin beach. A week later, they took their vows, placed them in a bottle, and watched them go on their merry way as they let them drift on Lake Michigan, only to be recovered by Lynette and Fred Dubendorf. To their delight and surprise, the wedding date matched theirs as they were married on August 18, 1979, almost 28 years earlier. If that's not a sign of forever love, then I don't know what is. Coming in at number 4, speaking of signs, many people often look for the right signs when making a big decision or when looking for love. After going through a rough breakup, Esther Gracken wrote her name on several dollar bills and promised herself that she would only marry the man who brought one back to her. Wow, wouldn't you know? A few years later, a man named Paul, dating Esther for a while, and he decided one day he's gonna ask her to be his girlfriend. That same day, as he was going to pay for a sandwich, he noticed that his dollar bill had Esther's name on it, written in pencil. Weird, he was just thinking about her. He decided to frame it and save it for her as a gift. When she got it, she gasped but didn't say anything until a few years later, because she didn't want to jinx it, when they were married. That was when she told him the story, and the two have lived happily ever since. Can't be explained, but it's pretty damn cute. Coming in at number 3, Parent Trap. So first off, consider the chances of actually conceiving twins. About 1 in 250, so that's already a cool thing. But then imagine you pull a parent trap and discover you have actually had a twin your entire life, but you were separated at birth, and then you find out that not only do you look identical, your lives are too. This is exactly what happened to two men when they were reunited at age 39. They were both named James, they both grew up to be police officers, and both their wives were named Linda. Each also had a son named James Allen and a dog named Toy. Then they both got divorced and both married a woman named Betty. What are the chances of that? More like one in a billion than 1 in 250.
Number 10, JFK and Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln and JFK have some uncanny similarities, and it freaks me out. They were both elected to Congress 100 years apart in 1846 and 1946 respectively. They both became president 14 years later in 1860, 1960, and both died by a fatal gunshot wound to the head and were succeeded by a man named Johnson who, wouldn't you know, just so happened to be born 100 years apart. Add to that some other coincidences like them dying on a Friday, their family names containing 7 letters, and the fact that they were both famous for their civil rights efforts, and you've got 2 presidents cut from an eerily similar cloth. So what does this mean? I don't know, but it sure is freaky. Number 8, double slit experiment. In physics' famous double slit experiments, electrons are fired at a photosensitive screen through slits in a copper plate, usually producing an interference pattern that indicates wave-like behavior. Now, this type of experiment was first performed by Thomas Young in 1801 as a demonstration of the wave behavior of visible light. Now, at the time, it was thought that the light consisted of either waves or particles, but with the beginning of modern physics about 100 years later, it was realized that light could in fact show behavior characteristics of both waves and particles. Some have taken this to mean our simulation is conserving its resources and rendering certain things only when it knows we're looking at them. So does this mean anything? I'm not sure, but it is something to consider. Number 7, Mandela effect. The Mandela effect is an observed phenomenon in which a large segment of the population misremembers a significant event or shares a memory of an event that did not actually occur. Fiona Broom, a paranormal researcher, coined the term to describe collective false memory when she discovered that a significant number of people at a conference she was attending in 2010 shared a memory that Nelson Mandela had died in prison during the 1980s. In fact, the former president of South Africa was released from prison in 1990 and was very much alive at the time of the conference. Now, this has caused an uproar on the internet with people discussing their experiences. For example, some people remember Mr. Monopoly wearing a monocle when he wasn't, Kit Kat with a dash in the middle, the Berenstain Bears or the Berenstein Bears, whichever you believe, and plenty more. Now, is this an accidental glitch in what we're remembering? Was it done on purpose? I don't think we'll ever know. Number 6, the Goldilocks zone. In astronomy and astrobiology, the circumstellar habitable zone, CHZ, or simply the habitable zone, is the range of orbits around a star within which a planetary surface can support liquid water given sufficient atmospheric pressure. The habitable zone is also called the Goldilocks zone, a metaphor allusion to the children's fairy tale of the Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, in which a little girl girl chooses from sets of 3 items, ignoring the ones that are too extreme, too large or small, or too hot or cold, and settling on the one in the middle, which is just right. Earth exists in what astrobiologists call a Goldilocks zone, close enough to a star that greenhouse gases can trap heat to keep liquid water, but far enough that the planet does not become a hothouse. People believe that us living in such an orbital sweet spot is circumstantial evidence for a simulation. And let me say, if we were in a simulation, this would be the perfect place to keep us humans. Number 5. Glitches in the Matrix. So with all computers, there can be technical difficulties, including glitches. Now many people believe there are real-life glitches, proving we're in a simulation. These glitches are events that seem comparable to the effects of errors in computer programs or their execution. Some examples of these include objects vanishing and sometimes reappearing, people being seen by different witnesses at different locations at the same time, or not being seen in places where they should be, aka people vanishing, often for a considerable amount of times, often with multiple searches, then reappearing and claiming that they have never left the spot. Also, changes in everyday familiar objects, and time slips and time freezes, where people interact with different time periods, or where they observe all movement and noises cease over a relatively short or larger area. Now, some glitches have been caught on camera, and one very popular glitch that has been documented lately is girls finding a nail that has broken off, matching their same nail color / design in their room, but they are not missing any nails. So where did the broken nail come from? No one knows, but it freaks me out. Number 4. Doppelgangers. A doppelganger is a biologically unrelated look-alike or a double of a living person. As you might have heard, there are 7 other versions of you in this world. Now, a study of look-alikes, unrelated people with faces so similar they could pass for identical twins, has found that such pairs share genetic traits. Scientists studied 32 pairs of individuals with uncanny similar headshots who are a part of a long-running project by a Canadian photographer to document these faux twins. The 16 pairs found by computer analysts who have the most similar features also share more genetic variants than the less similar pairs, the researchers concluded. Now, that's not a huge surprise because researchers are already using genetics to predict face shape. The twins do not share DNA methylation patterns, chemical marks controlling gene expression that are shaped by our environment, reinforcing the dominant role DNA alone plays in determining our appearance. Number 2. Philosophers. Now, throughout history, some of the world's most notable thinkers have laid out their own questions and ideas about why reality may not be exactly what it seems. According to Built-In, a significant number of people regard the simulation hypotheses as a modern offshoot of Plato's The Republic, or more specifically, the well-known allegory of the cave. In a nutshell, the scholar's allegory features cave prisoners drawing conclusions about reality from the shadows of puppets they can't actually see. Basically, a prisoner who sees the shadow cast by a book may think and draw assumptions from that shadow about what a book really is, but can only learn the truth if he breaks free and sees the actual book with his own eyes. He isn't the only philosopher though, as another example is from 1641 when philosopher René Descartes presented the idea of an evil demon powerful enough to create an illusion that looks and feels like reality. So if these people thought this and they have advanced technologies like computers, is it just a coincidence? Or is it more?
In our number 10 spot today, we have the man who survived 2 atomic. If you went to history class in high school, then you probably will remember hearing about the 2 atomic that the US dropped on the 2 Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. 90,000 people were killed due to the blasts and the radiation. But in 2009, the Japanese government confirmed that a man was in both of these cities during their and he survived both of them. Come again? Yes, a man named Tajumu Yamaguchi was on a business trip in Hiroshima on August 6th when he looked up at the sky and saw the B-29 and it dropped 2 parachutes. Before he knew it, he saw a great flash in the sky and he was blasted by the impact. By August 9, he was back home in Nagasaki recovering from the incident, only to endure it again. Even though you would probably think that he might not have lived long due to the radiation exposure, he actually lived to 93 and passed away in 2010. That's an insane story that makes you think out of 90,000 deaths this man survived, he must have had a higher purpose. In our 7th spot today, we have the arguably fateful death of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. I say arguably because, well, just you wait and you decide. Yet another story that I hope you learned in history class: the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and the beginning of World War II. You may have learned that he died after an attack on his car, but you may not know that the bomb that was meant for his car actually hit the car behind him and the attempt failed, and Ferdinand was able to get away unscathed. The assassins, we can imagine, were probably feeling hangry, due, of course, to this failed attempt and most likely hunger, as they then decided to stop at a nearby cafe for a sandwich. The Archduke, probably thankful to be alive, dashed off and continued on to safety when his driver took a wrong turn and ended up in front of the sandwich shop. The assassin saw him, shot him and his wife, and thus began the whirlwind of World War II. Makes you think that perhaps he was fated to die, or maybe he was just having a really bad luck day. I would love to know your thoughts in the comment section below. In our 6th spot today, we have the deaths of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. In 1775, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams became good friends fast. They worked together to draft the Declaration of Independence, and they also spent time together as diplomats for the US in Europe. They had a falling out in 1801 when Jefferson became president over Adams, and they didn't reconcile until 1812. On July 4th, 1826 though, the day that America declared its independence 50 years prior, Thomas Jefferson passed away. But what's interesting is that John Adams, in another state, was on his deathbed, only to say the words, "Thomas Jefferson survives," and then he passed away. Does this mean he saw Jefferson's ghost greet him on his deathbed? They both ended up passing on the same date, and not only that, but on the date that was seemingly their historical purpose. Coincidence? I think not. In our 5th spot today, we have the saving of Robert Todd Lincoln. You may or may not know this, but Robert Todd Lincoln is famously known as the son of the former US President Abraham Lincoln. In late 1864, Robert was traveling from New York to Washington when he found himself leaning against a stopped train. When the train started moving, he fell onto the tracks, only to be saved by an actor named Edwin Booth. When he later realized that his savior was the famous actor Edwin Booth, he made sure to thank him. It wasn't until much later did Edwin learn the identity of the man he saved, as he was the son of the president whom was shot by Edwin's brother, John Wilkes Booth. That's too weird of a coincidence for me. I guess perhaps if Lincoln's son had died, maybe Lincoln himself wouldn't have been where he was on that fateful day that he passed. In our 4th spot today, we have another weird coincidence revolving around Robert Lincoln: the death of not one, not two, but 3 American presidents occurred right in front of him. Highly sus, Robert. The first was, of course, his own father's assassination, President Abraham Lincoln. After his death, Robert and his mother moved to Chicago, where he planted roots, got married, had children, and created his law practice. He continued to work in politics as the Secretary of War under the presidency of President James A. Garfield in 1881. But while at a railroad station in Washington with Robert and a few others, Garfield was assassinated. Then in 1901, Robert was invited to attend a Pan-American exposition in Buffalo by President William McKinley, only to witness his assassination. Apparently, Robert has been quoted as saying that there was a certain fatality about the presidential function when I am present. Is there, Robert? Or did you perhaps concoct the death of your father with your savior Edwin Booth and his brother John, and then perhaps all these other incidences after? In our 3rd spot today, we have the comet family. It is said that your odds of being killed by a comet is 1 in 1,600,000, so not very high. You're more likely to be hit by lightning, and even that is 1 in 500,000. And so of course, on top of these odds, no one would expect that a comet would hit the home of a French family named, can you guess? Comet, or comet. I love the French. Comet. What are the odds? Probably in the trillions. Thankfully, nobody in the family was hurt, and they now have their very own space rock as a souvenir. Life is so funny and weird. In our number 2 spot, we have the Civil War house. In 1861, when the Civil War broke out with the first Battle of Bull Run, it at some point made its way through the garden of Wilmer McLean in Virginia. After the mass devastation, Wilmer decided to leave his home and he moved to a new place, Appomattox, Virginia. But of course, the war followed him there and actually came to a close when Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse, just only steps away from McLean's new property. Poor guy. He just wanted to live a peaceful, war-free life. Is that too much to ask for? Or perhaps he's psychic and he knew that peace would happen in this particular town. Who knows, but interesting coincidence.